So during this talk, we're going to make sure that you learn what important documents you need to have available when you start the school year. And you should be able to, at the end, be able to explain what you need to do to mentally prepare. It's always important to mentally prepare for the school year. It kind of hits us over the head when summer's over. And so it's always good to get ready for that. And then be able to state 3 actions that you need to take at the beginning of the school year. I want you to be able to go, okay, these are the things I need to do to start the school year. So here we go. This is what you probably feel like. You have a whole ton of documents from the school, from providers, from whoever, and you're sitting there looking at it going, oh my gosh, what do I use? What do I look at? What's the most important thing? And sometimes you're going to feel like this, and you're going to want to scream and pull your hair out, and just know that's okay, that we all go through that process. We all feel like that. But my job today, and what I hope we'll be able to do, is take you from these ladies to this lady who looks like she's ready to go. She's organized, she's calm, she's ready to go to the meeting. And dads, this applies to you too. If I've got dads out there like Kyle, I usually use female pictures, so I apologize, but most of the population tends to be women that go to these meetings. So we're going to look at the 8 steps, and these 8 steps are: organize your paperwork. So we want to go from that big old pile down to what you really need to have. And then we're going to talk about reminding yourself of the challenges that your child faces every day. I know for some of you that's really hard to do, but it's really important, especially as your child starts school. And then celebrate your child's strengths. Always want to celebrate. So I always do the challenges before we do the celebration, so that you can be on a positive note when you leave that process. And then organize your calendar. So you've got your paperwork organized. Now, what do you need to put in the calendar to remind yourself that these are things you need to do? And we're going to also organize your documentation. I know sounds weird. You got paperwork and documentation, but they're 2 different things. So I'll explain what I mean by those. And then build awareness. And that's mostly with the school I'm talking about here. So we'll talk about what that process looks like, especially if you start getting into middle school and high school. It's really important to build awareness. And then you want to prepare your child. Your child's getting ready to go into school. They may or may not be on an IEP, a 504, whatever, but whatever's going on, you want to prepare your child for what the year is going to look like. And then you want to determine if you need to schedule a meeting immediately. This is probably the most important, but until you go through those first 7 steps, you probably don't know if you need to schedule that meeting. So we're going to talk about all 8 of those things. So the first one is organize your paperwork. And again, we want to go from this pile of paper. I used to, and so I use that as still my picture, but I always had a binder and it was clear on the front, and I would put a picture of my daughter in there. And the reason why I did that is when a lot of times I had a tough kid. So the school would get upset that I felt like I was attacking them when I was really just trying to stick up for my daughter's needs. And they would sometimes be defensive and think I was saying they weren't doing a good job, which is not what I was saying. What I was saying is, this is what my daughter needs. So sometimes I've had meetings where I've had to hold up my daughter's picture and say, this is who we're working with. This is who we're talking about. With today's world, while we're doing a lot of things virtually, it's still important to organize your files, and you can do that electronically as well as hard copy, whichever works for you. If you're a hard copy person, put it in a hard copy. So you've probably read these things, but you want the last, and an ALP is an advanced learning plan. We might have some twice exceptional learners out there. So that means that they're on a 504 or an IEP and an advanced learning plan. So they're gifted and or talented in some area. So you want the last 2. You want the last 2 evaluations from the school. And if you have had an evaluation from a private provider, or you get OT services or speech services outside of school, you want those last 2 evaluations. You want their current health plan. Now, this is what I'm referring to here is their school health plan. That would have, if you have a child that's diabetic, it would include their what medications they get at school, or you have a child on medicine, or you have a child with seizures, then they will have a health plan at school. You want to make sure you have that in the binder. You want to make sure you have their current behavior intervention plan. If you have a child with behavior issues and the school has written the current behavior intervention plan, you want to make sure you have that in the binder. If your child's been diagnosed by an MD or a PhD, you want to make sure that you get a diagnosis letter. You don't have to, but I find that it really helps a lot of times to have that diagnosis letter. And if the school is saying, well, I don't know about this, you've got the diagnosis letter in your binder or in your documentation that you can provide. And then lists of medications and supplements your child is currently taking. I had my daughter is, her body gets accustomed to medications very simply. So we change medicines all the time. And when you do that, you want to make sure you keep a list of the current medications and supplements, and you want to make sure that you keep a list of past medications and your child's reactions if they've had adverse reactions. Trust me, you will be asked that question a lot of times through the school years, and with other doctors, you change doctors or whatever, it's really good to have that. Also, if you have a child that's going to go on any kind of field trip, they will ask you for that list of medications and supplements. So in case there's an accident or something, that's available. And then any state, school district, or school standardized testing. So again, just to have it in there, because sometimes it comes up in a meeting where the school will say, well, we need to look at that last, MAP test that was done, or the last whatever test that was done. You go, okay, it's right here. And you've got it right there. It just helps you be prepared for anything they might ask for. So I have found that if you have that available, and if you're going in person, you've got a binder. If you're on your computer, you can have it available in files. So if you have any questions on that, again, put it in Q&A. That's a lot of information right there, but it's really helpful for having that available. Okay, remind yourself of the challenges your child faces every day. And sorry, I have 3 boys and 1 girl, not to say that girls don't have challenges also. But as you can tell by that angry face of that teenage girl, girls can be just as challenging as boys. I know that the challenges that my children face, I didn't have. My children, as Kyle said, are adopted. So they were new to me, a lot of their challenges. And even if they're birth children, a lot of times parents don't have the same challenges. And so it's really helpful to remind yourself of what that looks like. If that means reading the psychologist report or reading your speech language person's report, just to get a reminder of what that looks like. And then write down any examples from the summer that you want to make sure the school knows about. Let's say something new cropped up. I have a client that all of a sudden this summer, over the summer, he started saying violent things. I'm going to kill you, as a reaction instead of other things that he could say. That's really important for the school to know, because we don't want the kid kicked out on the first day of school. And then you want to, how do they apply to the school year? So if your child is being triggered by something, let's say your child almost got hit by a car this summer, and all of a sudden that's triggering some kind of fear of cars or whatever. And you want to make sure that you write that down and you have that to talk to the school about. And then we talked about, you might want to read any previous documents to remind yourself of what happened last year. Now we look at the strengths. Oh my goodness, this is the fun part, right? How has my child progressed over the summer? Maybe you've got a soccer star or a baseball star, or they were able to participate in, arts and crafts or singing or dancing, or they were really great swimmers, or they went on lots of hikes. Whatever their strengths showed up this summer, again, make sure you write them down. And how do they apply to the school year? Well, if they're athletic, then that's going to apply, and maybe they need to get a little more exercise than other kids do, so that they can support that kinesthetic learning that they may have. So anything that may apply to the school year, you want to make sure that you write down. and explain it to the school, especially if it needs to be something that they need to know about at the beginning of the school year. I'm watching my time, make sure I give myself plenty of time. So organize your calendar. So it's really important to think about the dates that you need to meet with the school. So the first thing you do want to do is, if you have a child on a 504, look at the date of the 504. And if you have your child that's on an IEP, you want to pull that IEP out and you want to look at the next eligibility meeting that's on or before, and you want to look at the next review meeting on or before. Those 2 dates are really important. So the next eligibility is when they're going to have their next evaluation. Evaluations for IEPs have to be done every 3 years. So if they just got one last year or in the spring of 2021, the next one won't be till 2024. So that's great. If, however, it's due this year and it's due in November of 21, remember the school has 60 days to conduct an evaluation. So going backwards, they'll need 60 days before that for you to sign the consent form, because the 60 days doesn't start until you sign the consent form. So you want to look at those dates so that you're like, okay, have they reached out to me? I have some that are due in October, and we're like, okay, we got to sign the consent form the first day of school. So you want to look at those kind of things. And then the next review meeting, which is when the IEP, the annual IEP update is done. Now, you can have a problem with these dates. Let's say the eligibility meeting is December 29th, and the next review meeting is October 13th. If they go by those dates, you'll have to do 2 IEP meetings in 1 year. You don't want to do that. You want to talk to the school and say, okay, how do we make sure that we get where we only do 1 evaluation and 1 IEP this year? Okay. Now, there are sometimes you want to do 2 IEPs in a year, but not on purpose if you don't have to. It's a long process and it takes a lot of everybody's time and energy. So that's one thing that's really important to look at is your dates and when everything is going to be conducted. Does anybody, I'm going to ask now, does anybody have any questions on that? Because I know that can be confusing.
Yeah, if you would, anybody who has questions, if you would actually share those questions in the Q&A, that would be wonderful.
Or raise your hand and Kyle can call on you or whatever.
Yep, and you'll also have an opportunity to ask questions at the end as well.
Yeah,
so
I just know that can be confusing, so I wanted to take a break and see if anybody had any. Okay, so
thank you, Roxanne.
No problem. Let's move forward then. So we talked about paperwork. So that's mostly paperwork from that other people produce. Organize your documentation is your documentation of what's going on. And remember, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. So if you go and you talk to the teacher, this happens a lot in elementary school. You go and you talk to the teachers, you're dropping your kid off or picking your kid up, and they go, oh, you know, Susie seems to be having a problem with tying her shoes. She doesn't seem to get how to tie her shoes. Okay, and you say, well, what do you think we should do about that? And the teacher gives you a recommendation. Maybe she says, you know, maybe we need to practice doing it this way, or we need to do whatever. Go home and either you can do it in a calendar or a notebook, write the date, write down what was said. If it's important enough to do this, then I'm a big fan of emailing that information back to the teacher to say, did I understand you correctly? If this is what you said, great. If it's not, please clarify. The reason why I like to do that is, again, because if it's documented, the last set of documentation is what holds. So heaven forbid you do not have to take the school to court or argue, but if it does happen, you have your documentation to back up what happened. And also, it's just good for communication. So you go, a lot of times parents go to, you know, back to school nights or conference meetings, and they get a lot of information about their kid, and maybe they don't even have a child on an IEP, or maybe their child's on a 504 and they're hearing all this additional information. It's good to go back home, write that down, send that to the teacher and say, this is what I heard you saying. Okay. That way you make sure that there's not a miscommunication and that you're all on the same page. And you might want to CC the service providers at the school, because it's just you and the general education teacher probably talking. So sometimes it's good to share that information with other folks. So that's what I'm talking about when I say organize your documentation. Find a way that works for you. Sometimes I just had a calendar and it was where we put things that I just wrote little notes on there, you know, especially if you have a child with behavior issues or ADHD issues where they forgot their homework. So just jot it down. Teacher called about homework being forgotten. My son refused to do homework tonight. You know, things like that, so that you can look at, there's a trend going on and say, look, 4 nights out of 5, my child does not want to do homework. So either they're too tired when they get home, there's something that they aren't learning that we need to focus on. There's some reason my child is refusing homework, and we need to figure out why that is. Okay.
And Roxanne,
Go ahead, Kyle.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, before you move forward, there are a few questions that came up.
Sure.
As we went. And the first question was, what you were talking about with the IEP, was it valid for all states?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Every state should have, yes. Short answer, yes. The dates are the same. It's 3 years for everybody. It's 1 year annual. So that's federal law. That's part of federal law. That shouldn't change. The 60 days might be a little bit different. It's 60 days by feds. States can adjust that. So you do want to check your state law for that.
And then the other question was, does this apply to 504 plans?
Okay, on the 504 plan, it's usually an annual update. So you still want to look at the date, and usually it's just a meeting. If they even hold one, they don't have to by law, but they usually do hold a 504 plan meeting at least once a year.
Great. Okay. And then this final question.
And that's federal law, so that covers all states also.
Thank you, Roxanne.
Sure.
And then this final question I have here right now is, my daughter only has a CAP, classroom accommodation plan. She's going into 5th grade and is gifted, dyslexic, and probably ADHD, although she hasn't been diagnosed. Do I need an official IEP, especially when she heads to middle school?
Okay, so here's the difference between a 504 and an IEP. Depends on what your child needs. So a CAP, I think you're probably from Texas, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. But that's basically the same as a 504. So when you only have accommodations, that's typically covered under a 504. Schools get no money for 504s, okay? So even though under a 504 you can cover services, they tend not to do it under 504s because they get no money with a 504. If your child is on an IEP, they get additional funding for that. So if your child needs services, speech service, mental health support, specialized learning from the special ed teacher, those are all services, and that would be covered under an IEP, not a 504 typically. So if you have a child that you think needs services to learn, then you probably want to find out, you want to ask for a comprehensive evaluation. That's the first step. Always ask for everything in writing. Don't ask it verbally, and make sure that you use the right terminology, that you ask for a comprehensive evaluation. And Kyle, I can put that actually on your website as a document that people can use to ask
Wonderful.
for an evaluation. So we'll make sure that happens. But you want to cover every area that's important, okay? And one area that some schools and some areas, Colorado being one of them, tends not to want to do when you ask for an evaluation is do a cognitive. And I always ask for a cognitive evaluation. If you've got a child with ADHD then you really want to ask for a cognitive, because typically along with ADHD, they'll have processing speed and or working memory issues. And those are real important for the school to know how severe those issues are. And if you've got a twice exceptional kid, you want to know how smart they are to go along with their deficits. So for example, for my son on his IQ test, in the verbal comprehension, he was at the 99th percentile. That's about as high as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
His processing speed was the 0.5 percentile. So here's a kid with lots of ability to learn and very little ability. Processing speed doesn't really mean how fast your brain goes. It really means visual motor, as well as getting information out of your head. So it's how fast can you get the information out your head, down your arm, into your hand, and write it down. So he had all this information in his head, but he could not get it out of his mouth or onto a piece of paper. So a lot of supports had to be given, especially early, to help him learn how to do that. He is now, just so you know, he's now 26 and finished 4 years in the Army as a medic, and he's studying to become a nurse. So it's
That's great.
IEP land is not the end of being successful. So just so you know.
And thank you, Roxanne. I appreciate you sharing that story. And the person who asked that last question, they actually go to a private school right now. So
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah. If you go to a private school, then the private schools are under no obligation to support IEPs or do IEPs. Okay. 504's, they really should, because it's under the Disabilities Act. And so that's independent of a school. IEPs are only for public schools. So you can ask for a 504. However, you can in most states, I don't know exactly all states, I know in Colorado it's true, you can go to your local school district and ask for an evaluation. And they are actually supposed to do an evaluation even though your child attends private school. So that's something to know about. So, and also to know that if the school does an evaluation and it does not reflect what you think your child has issues with or reflect your child, you can ask for an independent educational evaluation, and then the school district has to pay for a private provider to do an additional evaluation. So one evaluation is not the end all be all of everything. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So build awareness. This is real important, especially as you go into middle school and high school, like I said, because teachers don't always, and let me preface everything I say by the fact that there are teachers out there doing incredible, incredible jobs. I get brought in when the teachers aren't doing incredible jobs. So I tend to see the seedier side of what goes on in schools. However, I do know that even if they're doing an incredible job, they have a really hard job. And so one of the things that and I was a middle school teacher, so I know from experience that middle school can be a really wild place to work. And I was teaching, hate to say this, but I was teaching right before IEPs came out. So I didn't quite have that thing going on, but, or they were just coming out. So one of the things you want to do is make sure that your teacher has a copy of your IEP. In Colorado, we only give a summary. And when you give the summary, it doesn't include present levels of the IEP. And a lot of times the meat is in the present levels. So if they only get the accommodations and the goals, let's say one of the accommodations is preferential seating. They don't necessarily know whether that preferential seating is because of attention, or it's because of hearing, or it's because of seeing, or what that preferential seating is for. So again, it's really good to set up time to talk to your teachers and make sure that they are in agreement with you as to what their job is. And if you've got a child on an advanced learning plan, which is Colorado is only one of 5 states that supports kids that are gifted and talented. So if you're from another state, you may not have advanced learning plans, or you might call it something else, but there's only 5 states right now that do it. So if they have an advanced learning plan, then they should be responsible for encouraging and challenging your child. And they should help your child meet their ALP goals. Now they're going to have a gifted and talented teacher that is supposed to help too, but also the gen ed teacher should help. The 504, every teacher, staff, everybody should know about 504 accommodations. Specials teachers, everybody. So it's really important that they know what your child's accommodations are, especially if you have a child that cannot do self-advocacy. Kids should learn how to advocate for themselves, but for some kids, especially elementary school, I don't ever expect elementary kids to advocate for themselves. By the time you get into middle school, they should start being advocates for themselves. High school, yes, we really want them to really get there. However, if you have a kid that's shy, if you have a kid with mental health issues, if you have a kid who has anxiety, they may not be able to self-advocate. And it doesn't matter whether they are on an ALP or a 504 IEP, or I should say an ALP. So I had a client who was one of the smartest kids I worked with, brilliant. And he had anxiety and dyslexia and dysgraphia. And so he did not want to advocate for himself. And he didn't even go to IEP meetings. Even as brilliant as he was, he couldn't handle going to an IEP meeting. And we'll get to that one in a minute. But it's just really important that you, as a parent, make sure that that process takes place. Okay. And then last and not least, and also to be aware that a lot of gen ed teachers are not taught about disabilities. If they get anything, it's a real small part of their curriculum. They don't know about IEPs and they don't know about 504s. So unless you have a good case manager who does that, and even if you do have a good case manager, you're just supporting the effort to make sure they know what's going on. And then the teacher's responsible for providing the child's accommodations. And if they have modifications. And they're also responsible for helping your child meet their IEP goals. It's not just the special ed teacher or the service providers. And then you want to make sure, I don't have it on here, but make sure you identify your child's IEP team. If they've moved to middle school, you want to make sure you know who's on that IEP team and have their email addresses. And then if you have a child that can do this, I had a client who had a child with ADHD and autism. And what they did in middle school, I think for the second year in middle school, they worked with the kid over the summer. And I know Kyle has done this in his work at his facility, and had him put together a video on how he learned. And he took that video and played it for the teachers and then stayed in the meeting and let them ask him questions. And he did that right at the beginning. We set it up so it was before the big school started. And so the day before school, he went in, he played the video and then asked them if they had questions. And of course, his mom was there to support. But that's so powerful. That team was so impressed and they knew what he needed without any questions. So always figure out different ways to do things like that. Okay. Prepare your child. So does your child need to attend IEP meetings? Absolutely not. They recommend that they attend IEP meetings, especially starting at age 15 when you start transitioning, this transition process. However, they do not have to attend. My daughter would get so upset she would cry for 3 days. So there was no way I was going to let her attend an IEP meeting. It's all dependent on your child. And then figure out who should explain the documents to your child. Typically in elementary school, they aren't quite as involved in their documentation, the IEP or 504. They probably will the ALP, but not the other two. But when they get to the point where they need to learn to advocate for themselves, sometimes it's better for the special ed teacher or case manager to sit down with your child and explain their IEP. Sometimes you want to do that as a parent. Sometimes you want to do it as the parent along with the special ed teacher. So find what works for your child. And that's why I say prepare your child. You know, if they're getting ready to go into high school, go through their accommodations with them. Let them know that it's okay for them to stick up for themselves. It's okay to say, I need a quiet place to take this test. I can't take it in the classroom. Okay. Because that's on their accommodations. Okay. So it's really important to kind of prepare your child. And I have a client right now, his child is in third grade. And he asks his mom all kinds of questions every day about his teacher and what his schedule is. And, well, you're going to this meeting. Are you going to be able to do this, this, and this? So that's a kid I expect to be involved quite a lot lately when his anxiety is under control. So, and then step 8, last step, is determine if you need to schedule a meeting immediately. So does my child's health plan need to be updated? Maybe meds change this summer. Does the behavior intervention plan need to be updated? You know, like I talked about earlier, you've got somebody blurting out, you know, I'm going to kill you. You want to make sure you get the intervention plan updated. Does the ALP 504 and IEP reflect your child's current strengths and weaknesses? Maybe over the summer they went to Kyle's company and I always forget this, results learning. Thank you. Results learning. They went to results learning and they like made huge leaps. And so you need to look to see if it still reflects it. And then if with the current plan in place, will your child be farther behind even if all the goals are met? So if you have a child with an intellectual disability, then they may be farther behind and you're expecting that. But if you have a child that doesn't have an intellectual disability and they're behind, you want to make sure that they're going to make progress this year. They're not going to get farther behind. So if it's yes to any of those, then you want to email the school and ask for a meeting to be scheduled, an IEP meeting to be scheduled, so that you can address your concerns and things that you might think need to be changed.
Roxanne, given the pandemic and the way many kids, you know, were schooled over the last year and a half, you know, with remote school and some back and forth, do you see when parents go to ask for an evaluation, do you see that kind of causing any roadblocks, because knowing that all kids potentially lost some academic gains?
One of the things that's a good question, really good question. The schools right now are trying to determine, and I already had a couple of IEP meetings where they're doing this, where they're trying to determine what kind of regression took place. And so they should be doing that process right now. And they should be able to tell you whether or not they think the regression is typical to all the other kids. Okay. However, if you have a kid that's had regression that was having trouble before the pandemic, and now the pandemic's only added to that, then you want to request an evaluation. Okay. And if that question was related to, will the current plan, you know, will the child be farther behind? Again, it's based on the goals. So the goals were developed independent of the pandemic. So the question is, are they going to meet their goals? Okay.
Great.
So did that answer that, Kyle? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
sure.
you.
Good question. So remember, it's okay to speak up and advocate on behalf of your child. That is not a bad thing to do. And you can call a meeting to discuss the ALP 504 and IEP whenever you feel it is necessary. I had one year in my daughter's life where we had an IEP meeting, I think almost every month. It was just a really tough year for her. Sometimes you need to call an official meeting. Sometimes it can just be an informative meeting. So I've had an official IEP meeting already with one client. With another client next week, I'm having an informative meeting. With another client, I had an informative meeting. So it can be just informative. It doesn't have to be official, depending upon what the issue is. And call a meeting with the school before you get mad. Don't wait until you're so angry that you just want to scream and yell at the teachers. So if you see your child struggling or not being challenged, check in with school personnel to determine how to support your child. Okay?
Good advice.
What?
I said that's great advice.
Thanks.
Great advice. Yeah.
And then document all meetings, see step 5, right? So anytime you do have a meeting, you want to document it. With a lot of meetings now with virtual, if you have virtual IEP meetings, ask for a recording. It's really easy for them to set that up. If you go to a meeting in person, in Colorado, we have single person, right? We can record meetings, but I like to let them know that I'm going to record the meeting, and then usually they record it too. It's just one of those things that saves a lot of time if there's, well, you said, it avoids the he said, she said, we said.
Great.
And again, if you document it and send it back and say, this is what I understood we said, then everybody's on the same page.
Perfect.
So what it can feel like. So trust me, everybody can feel like this little guy in the middle here where everybody's pointing fingers. The teachers can feel like that. You as parents can feel like that. Everybody can feel like that. So just know everybody's feeling that they're on the hot seat when you go into a meeting, whether you're the parent or the teacher. And then Learning Differences of the World can help. And I have contact information there, and I think Kyle's going to send it to you in an email. So we have 15 minutes for questions. How did I do, Kyle?
You did amazing, Roxanne. Thank you. That was
You're
fantastic.
welcome.
So I'm going to start with a few questions. I see
Sure.
some hands raised as well, but so we will try and get to everybody. So first, can schools stall? So this is a question that was posted.
And I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay.
Yep, great.
Okay.
All right. So can schools stall a child from being assessed by using RTI? My son has an IEP for ADHD. I had a private evaluation for dyslexia. The school is stalling as he is still on RTI.
And RTI, for those of you that don't know, is response to intervention. And according to what the law says, and this is federal law, is that should not be an excuse from doing an evaluation. So what needs to happen, my recommendation in there is I'll give Kyle that terminology, but you need to ask for it verbally, in writing, because verbally doesn't count. So ask for it in writing. The other thing you want to put on there, and I think I may not have this on that sheet, so write this down, is you want to put on there that I will be at the school on such and such a date in the morning to sign the consent form. Okay. And then when you go to the school, read the consent form, make sure all the areas you're interested in are on there. If they're not, feel free to write it in and then sign it. Okay. Because the 60 days then starts when that form gets signed. So a lot of times they'll find schools will, they'll talk about response to intervention. The other thing I hear is, well, we don't know your child yet. So we need some time to get to know your child. And my response to that is, well, I'm sorry, but private providers meet the child 5 minutes before they evaluate them, and those are considered valid results. So you don't really have to say that. You really want to keep that in your back pocket unless they get ugly, but you really want to just be kind of persistent and say, this is the date I'm going to come in and sign the consent form.
Great. Thank you. All right, next question. So from another attendee, my son has a formal diagnosis from a comprehensive evaluation of ADHD and processing disorder. He left middle school last year with a 504 in place. I've sent all information and suggested services to the high school principal based on the reports. She thinks he needs an IEP. We pay out of pocket for speech therapy, therapy for executive functioning because he was at home learning when he started them, and has bonded with his therapist. So technically we don't need services from the school. My question is there an advantage to an IEP beyond these types of services? For instance, accommodations for standardized testing like SAT or ACT, or can we achieve these things with the 504?
There's lots of different answers to that. So let me see how I can word that. First of all, 504 is all you need to get accommodations for SATs and PSATs and all those ACTs, all those tests. You want to make sure that it's registered with the school, and the school has to ask for those accommodations specifically. So you want to make sure that the school counselor knows to do that. Secondly, the reason why you might want those services at school, in addition to having them at home, is the progress may go faster. So that you're getting not only things in the school environment, but also in the home environment. An IEP only goes up through age 21 or graduation from high school, whichever comes first. So that's it's limited in terms of the scope. More the 504 goes all the way through college and even onto your job. So the 504 is more of a long-term goal plan than the other. So it just kind of depends on whether or not the services, and part of that I would ask your providers, is whether or not they would see a benefit from having goals at school as well as at home. Sometimes if a child is on a 504, sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes their needs get a little bit overlooked versus versus a child that's on an IEP. Okay. The teachers absolutely know they have to do an IEP. Sometimes they don't realize they have to do the 504. And there was a question about contact information that just popped up. And yeah, Kyle will include my contact information in his email to you guys.
Yep, fantastic. And then I had one that came in earlier that we haven't gone through yet. So this one says ADHD diagnosis. Must it be via a neurologist or a PhD following DMS? Not sure what the DMS is.
Diagnostic and manual, diagnostic and statistical manual. DSM is actually what it is, and so the
Gotcha.
DNS. But yes. So the answer is that unless it's speech can be, it all depends on licensing. Schools cannot diagnose. Schools can only indicate. They can't diagnose. Only MDs and PhDs can diagnose unless it's a speech, and then somebody with a master's can diagnose. So if you want to get a diagnosis, and also I was just looking, and I've heard this from, I have another advocate who does accommodations at high school and college level. So he's like post me and focuses mostly on accommodations to get the right accommodations into testing. And when you're looking at getting accommodations for SATs, MCATs, all that kind of good stuff, then the diagnosis letter is really, really important. So it shows that there's a long-term history. It shows that there's, that this is something that's recognized by a professional MD or PhD. Doesn't have to be a neuropsych. It can be a PhD psych person. Hopefully that helped.
Great. All right. So and then the next question just popped off my screen. So, okay. So for families that have a child whose IEP was developed at the end of the last school year, 2021, should we expect the IEP plan to be implemented as soon as school starts?
Yes. So it should be implemented as soon. It won't be day one. I'll be real honest. It also depends on what grade level. It's easier to get it all implemented at the beginning of school in elementary, but I would give them a week, 2 at the most. And if you aren't seeing it being implemented, call a meeting.
Right.
Or at least talk to the case manager.
Perfect. And, I think this question was a follow-up to the one I asked about the pandemic, which is at what point should parents not allow the school to use the pandemic as an excuse to not implement your child's IEP or provide accommodations?
Say that one more time.
So at what point should parents not allow the school to use the ongoing pandemic as an excuse to not implement your child's IEP or provide accommodations?
Oh, the pandemic should never be used for applying the IEP. It might be used for not updating the IEP, but it should not be used for not applying the IEP. So goals and accommodations should be right on target, getting it done. Now they might say we're behind. And then your question is, how are you going to catch up? Are you going to provide remediation? Are you going to provide services in addition to help with the regression? So those are questions that you can ask, but they should not be saying, well, we can't do your IEP because of a pandemic. That all the schools have agreed to that, feds, everybody, that the pandemic should not be used as an excuse.
Great. And I think, so here's another one. I live in Colorado and I was told by a teacher that once a child goes to middle school, the services they receive via an IEP will be greatly diminished or be non-existent. Is that true, or should that be true?
Oh, that's a really good one. Okay. It depends on what the issues are. They do approach things differently as you go up the ladder. So they want the child to be more and more independent, as we all do, as they go up the educational ladder. However, what your child needs is what your child needs, independent of what their level of school is. Now, and I get into debates about this all the time. If you've got a child with ADHD in elementary school, a 504 may be fine because they do a lot of executive function scaffolding in elementary school, way more than I got, right? Let's write the first sentence of the paper. Let's now all write the third. They do a lot of hand-holding. They go to middle school, all of a sudden that's gone. So the 504 may not be appropriate for middle school for a kid with ADHD if they haven't got good executive function skills, or they haven't been taught good coping mechanisms for those executive function skills.
Right.
Trust me, they do need to learn those. Most people learn it by osmosis or modeling. People with ADHD, you have to direct instruct. They are not going to learn it just because you said make a list. They don't know what that means. They don't know when to make it. They don't have the initiative to sit down and do it. So then all of a sudden in middle school, they're going to start falling farther and farther behind. They're not going to turn in their work. They're going to start failing because they don't have executive function skills. Did that answer the question? I think so. That yes, there is a difference.
Yep.
However, what your child needs is what your child needs. So there needs to be a discussion about how to make sure those services are provided.
Great. So in a nutshell, they shouldn't change if your child needs, for example, that executive functioning support. It still needs things broken down. That should still be an accommodation on the 504 that's met by the school.
Yes. But the support they get in the classroom will be diminished.
Yep.
Okay. So therefore, they have to have other ways to provide that support if it's not being provided by a gen ed teacher. Did that clarify that or make it muddy?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think so. All right. So and another person that's in Massachusetts, and they don't allow recording of meetings in her district because she asked, but she has a medical diagnosis that makes it difficult for her to participate, process, etc. Is there any way I can get them to allow recordings? I've had to file with the state already for them, just ignoring my own request and giving me a hard time.
That's sad. I'm sorry that that's happening. That's sad. My understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't be absolutely true, but my understanding based on my reading of the federal law is that everybody can ask for a recording, and the meeting needs to be recording and provided to both parties. If you have a disability where you cannot take notes, and that's what you're asking for, then the other thing you can do is ask for a scribe. So if it's your disability that's getting in the way, or if you speak a foreign language and you need a translator, they are supposed to provide, the schools are supposed to make sure that parents understand and can participate in IEP meetings. So that's what the law says. And I'm really surprised in Massachusetts, usually the Northeast is way ahead of everybody else in terms of meeting parents' needs and kids' needs. So I'm kind of surprised in Massachusetts that that's happening. I would look to see if there's an advocacy organization there that can help, even not just for your kids, but for you individually, to advocate. But I do that when I had a team that I thought wasn't going to let me record and was going to fight it or whatever, then I put, this is my accommodation because I can't take notes as fast as I used to. And I don't want to have to think about notes. I want to listen to the meeting. But if you're asking for the accommodation, they aren't getting it, then I would do something about that. I would escalate that for sure. And I would talk to a disabilities organization that's for you to get support on that. I want to go back to one of the questions somebody else asked about that they talked to a principal about an IEP. Just so you know that at least in Colorado, we have a dual reporting structure. So special ed report up through the district, through special ed department, as well as to their building. So if you're going to escalate something on a special ed in Colorado, you go up through the special education department, not through the building administration. And the reason for that is that if the school district gets sued, the special ed department is the ones that know the law and step in and have to do all that work. So they're the ones that need to be informed that there's a problem, not just the building. The best way to escalate in Colorado is through your district special ed department.
Great. Well, Roxanne, it is 1 o'clock, so we're going to wrap up. I just want to say thank you so much. We could go on and on. I mean, this is such a hot button, so many hot button topics here, especially with the school year started. But I think we've got some really solid advice from you on, some of those things that we should really be preparing and have in place for the school year that are going to make our lives easier in advocating for our kids. So thank you so very much for your guidance today and your time. And we will send out tomorrow a email with a link to this recording, which will be on the Guiding Bright Minds YouTube channel. Please rewatch it. Feel free to share it with anybody who you think needs the information. In addition, I'll have Roxanne's contact information, more information on Guiding Bright Minds and how we can guide you in the process. And at this time, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who joined us today. We appreciate your time. Again, Roxanne, thank you. And we hope everybody you're welcome. And we hope everybody has a great positive start to the school year.
Yes. Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.